So yeah, so no songs tonight, but I will be talking a lot about the symbolism of an aspect of the story of Milarepa, which is my sort of curiosity really. So, oh my goodness, I've got quite a few pages here, but it's as you can see, it's quite spaced out. Okay, it's not as thick as it looks. And every talk is an experiment really, and I still haven't figured out the best way to present a talk really, a Dharma talk. And so I thought, I'm going to create a lot of space between the lines so I can read them, because sometimes they just sort of merge, and you think, oh my God, I can't even figure that out. So we'll just see how we go. I know it's at least 15 minutes long, but that was only page 6, and there's about another 15 pages. So,
22 pages.
Oh, sorry, 22 pages. I don't really know how it's going to unfold, and already I'm thinking, come on, Bodhinaya, get a move on, because I haven't written anything of what I'm talking to you about down now. So I better get cracking. But I do have some questions. Either questions that, maybe we could explore in small groups. That's a possibility, or even questions to take away with you. So and I'm really pleased we did the metta. I'm really pleased we did the metta bhavana tonight, because sometimes metta helps us to see the nature of our mind more clearly, and I am focusing on some of the darker aspects of our mind, and we do need a lot of metta to be able to see that in a healthy and clear way. So thanks, Aryavachin, for bringing that into the proceedings for tonight. Proceedings? What kind of word is that? Okay, so I'm just going to go over a little bit of the story of Milarepa and his earlier life, and then I'm going to sort of make some sort of symbolic connections and reflect on that story, and then in those reflections, perhaps some things that we could consider ourselves, so that we can go into our lives and have some suggestions, not necessarily suggestions that I'm going to be offering you, but hopefully some ideas that you feel you could play around with actually and experiment with. Okay, so I'll just share a little bit about Milarepa's earlier life. So it was a good one. He had a good early life. His parents loved him, and they provided for him, and he also had a younger sister. So all was good until he was 7 years old, when his father fell ill and eventually died. Anyway, on his father's deathbed, Milarepa's father requested his brother and sister attend to him, so he can imagine the scene, the bed scene, someone dying, family gathered, and he sort of asks his brother and sister if they will look after Milarepa and his family, And of course, Milarepa's father, brother and sister, Milarepa's aunt and uncle, they will. They'll do everything they can to look after Milarepa. Well, reality was quite different. They were very cruel carers, and they treated Milarepa's mother and younger sister very badly. And in fact, they were pretty much treated like slaves, actually, really ill-treated, And as you can imagine, Milarepa and his mother and his younger sister, they started to feel some rage around this, some injustice around their treatment. Anyway, time passes and Milarepa reaches the age of 15. And of course, in Tibet at that time, 15 was a sort of a coming of age. Yeah. And his mother manages to raise, enough funds to have a party to celebrate Milarepa's coming of age, with the expectation that Milarepa will receive his father's inheritance, which was a large mansion, lots of fields, yeah, and of course crops. Well, it didn't quite work out that way. Oh my goodness, that was just page 1. So, anyway, the aunt and uncle refuse to give Milarepa his due inheritance. And of course, the situation gets worse, doesn't it? Not only are Milarepa, his mother, and his younger sister slaves, but they are thrown out of the house by the aunt and uncle. So I'm sure you can imagine the kind of rage and sense of injustice the family may have felt. But no more than Milarepa's mother, who was determined on revenge. So much so that she requested that Milarepa trained in sorcery and learnt the darker arts. Or she will kill herself. So, her situation sounds really desperate, doesn't it? Yeah. So Milarepa trains in the lesser of the dark arts and manages to convince the sorcerer to train in the stronger arts. And so the training in the stronger arts started with Milarepa building a great stone building where for 7 days he begins to cast his spell against the aunt and uncle. And after 7 days, the sorcerer says, that's enough, Milarepa. But no, Milarepa really, he's got a lot of willpower. He wants to make sure this spell works, so he carries on creating his spell. So even at this stage, we just get a real sense, don't we, of Milarepa's enormous willpower. So far, far away, in the great mansion where Milarepa's aunt and uncle are living, they're also celebrating their oldest son's marriage. There's lots of wedding guests. Yeah. And of course, this is where Milarepa is directing his spell. And under the house are 4 pillars holding up the great mansion. And this is where the stables are and where the horses are kept, where a great multitude of scorpions are gathering. As you can imagine, the horses start to panic and they start to go wild, and so much so that they begin to demolish the pillars, and the great mansion falls to the ground, killing all the wedding guests. However, as bad luck would have it, the uncle and the aunt survived. They just happened to be somewhere else. Oh dear, that didn't quite work out, did it? And of course, Milarepa hears of their survival, and he's just so determined that he's going to get revenge. He goes into a deep concentration and cultivates a large dark cloud over the village where the aunt and uncle live. And 3 hailstorms pound the village, destroying all the fields and crops. I mean, this is serious stuff, isn't it? Because, fields provide crops, fields provide food for the village. So, in a sense, there are even more people getting embroiled in Milarepa's spell of hatred. The village will die as a consequence. So what is the outcome of Milarepa's action on his spells of dark magic and his mother's determination on revenge? Well, there are no fields anymore. They've all been destroyed. The great mansion, Milarepa's inheritance, is also destroyed. The family are worse off. The chances of them receiving their inheritance are completely been negated. So over time, Milarepa ponders his actions, and a terrible remorse comes over him. What has he done? What has he done? He becomes more and more aware of the evil that he's created and built up. And as chance would have it, the sorcerer has also been sort of contemplating life after the loss and death of a friend. I can't remember if it's a friend or a family member, but he's also recognises that something needs to change in his life too. And he needs to live a more skillful life. And as a consequence, the sorcerer, where Milarepa was apprenticed, recognises that Buddhism is a possible pathway to a more skillful life. So Milarepa, as we heard last week from Kusa Devi, seeks a teacher, Marpa, who can help him live a more skillful life, where eventually he is liberated and achieves full and complete enlightenment. So this story, it's a very famous story, despite all the different Buddhist traditions in Tibet. The story of Milarepa is very revered in all traditions. But the story has been embellished over hundreds of years. How close it is to the actual life of Milarepa, we don't know, we can't be sure. But that doesn't take the magical element of the story away. So Bhante talks about Sangha, the many incidents in the story that might be questionable. They might not be historical facts, but they point to symbolic and archetypal significance. And we don't know really whether Milarepa was green or wore a loincloth and meditated day and night in freezing cold conditions. But there's no harm in sort of making up our own mind, whether it's factual, historical, or symbolic. I'm approaching it symbolically. I just want to make that clear. But the thing is, it doesn't necessarily, symbolism is also points to truth. It doesn't necessarily take anything away from the story, whether it actually happened or not. It's poetry, it's poetical. And like most poetry, it expresses a truth. Yeah. It was very interesting when Bhante was writing the survey. So the survey was one of Sangharakshita's really significant works. It's quite a hefty volume around the history of Buddhism. And I don't know who asked him this question, but someone asked him once what was the most enjoyable part. And I think it was the bit when he said where he sort of gave free rein to a more poetical expression. And I was sort of very struck by that, even though it's a sort of quite a hefty sort of book. But it, for Bhante, it was that sort of potentially symbolic exploration that really seemed to resonate with him. So this story, it's an expression, isn't it, of the nature of mind, which sort of makes quite a nice link with our coming series. Actions have consequences. So I'm just going to reread the verse that that Arivachin read earlier, partly because I really love it, but I feel like it just helps to clarify this nature of mind. Yeah, that actions have consequences. Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with an impure mind, suffering follows, even as the cartwheel follows the hoof of the ox, drawing the cart. And in some ways, this story of Milarepa sort of, for me, symbolically expresses that very clearly. This nature of mind. Actions have consequences. Not by hatred. Our hatred's pacified here in the world. They are pacified by love. This is the eternal law. More hatred isn't going to pacify hate. And of course, we see that in the story of Milarepa, don't we? He cultivates one spell and then another spell. And what happens? Well, there's no chance now of them ever receiving the mansion, the entitlement, the inheritance. There's no chance of them ever receiving the fields. And I find that a fascinating symbol of where hate leaves. It takes you nowhere. All it does is entrench you more and more. Where in samsara, actions have consequences. The fruits of hate is only hate and more hate. I'll just a bit of a side here, really. It's getting a bit heavy, isn't it? Oh, blimey. It's just a little precept that I've developed over some time now, is to actually avoid using the word hate. I find it, this talk, not included in that. But I just find it a very difficult word. I just find it, it's just a little thing I've done in my practice. It's just there's lots of other words I could use, like dislike. But I do find the use of the word hatred quite. I don't enjoy it. So I've sort of, as much as I can, I would try and find what I feel a more creative word. Not by hatred is hatred pacified here in the world. It's only pacified by love. So again, as I said earlier, the only thing Milarepa acquired from his evil actions was just great remorse, great regret. Yeah, vowing to live his life without regret. I think there's this quite famous aphorism of Milarepa's. It goes something like, to live and die without regret. That was Milarepa's, if you like, guiding principle, to live and die without regret. So as I said earlier, the story is symbolic of all our minds. We are all capable of great evil, all capable of practicing the dark arts, wishing evil on others, casting spells on others, having those kinds of intentions. But we're also very capable of deeds of great kindness and compassion. So in the story, we hear of the suffering of Milarepa and his family at the hands of the aunt and uncle. And it's quite easy to feel Milarepa and his family are justified plotting their aunt and uncle's downfall. But there is no justification for hate. There's no space for hate in the spiritual life. If we really want to evolve, you need to work with hate. I don't know if anyone remembers, Ratnagosha talked in November, and he talked about how justice isn't a Buddhist value. So justice is not a Buddhist value. And of course, quite closely linked with justice is revenge, isn't it? Sort of dressed up version of revenge. So I'm sure you're like me, but it's very easy, isn't it, to create and build a story that justifies our hate. And I'm just owning my mind and owning those experiences that I have and still have. I just want to read something, a poem, short poem by Hafiz. Oh, I can't pronounce his name. What's his name? Arivachin. Hafiz? Is anyone? Hafiz, yeah, he's a Sufi master. And there's this great poem here. I'm only going to read half of it, but I thought I really liked it. And I thought it captured this sense of wanting to have justice and wanting to blame and not be responsible for my own mind, if you like. The poem's called Get the Blame Straight. Dear ones, this curriculum tonight is for the advanced, and we'll get all the blame straight. End the mental lawsuits that clog the brain. So I don't know about you, but I can get into a lot of stories of injustice, and revenge, and not necessarily violent in their extreme, but violence in their sort of lower realm, if you like, because it's hatred. And it's so easy to start building stories and creating stories and what you might say and what you might do and imagining conversations and how you might say it and all this and the other. And of course, the problem of hate isn't out there. The problem is that thought. It's my mind. The hateful thought is the problem. It's just so easy, isn't it, just to think it's out there, but it's not. It's the thoughts that I'm having. It's my mind. It's the nature of my mind. We will not solve our problems by looking outside of ourselves and blaming others. So I've been doing a bit of reflection around this more recently, and of course this talk is partly based on some of these reflections that I've been having. And I was reflecting on blame, and I was thinking, okay, so it's something that my thought is the problem. And I sort of took it a bit further, and I thought, what am I doing here? I'm trying to blame other people for what I'm thinking. And I thought, how ridiculous is that? There's a sense of saying, oh yeah, you're responsible for my mind and the way I'm thinking at this moment. And I thought, oh goodness me, I could sort of see the comical and farcical nature of that. And of course, it does help when you can get some clarity on that. So I'm having this thought, and You over there are responsible for it. I was just thinking of this story a friend told me. He was on a solitary retreat and he was sort of in the middle of nowhere on a Scottish isle somewhere, and it's this great story really, and he was watching this boat, this sailing boat, just sailing, and he could feel this real hatred about the way they were sailing the boat. I thought, he says it was the way they were moving across the sea. I was just thinking, wow, what a wonderful story. Do you know what I mean? You think, how could that come about? Well, of course, it's complete projection, isn't it? Yeah. I'm sure you're laughing at it because you identify with it, because I certainly do. Yeah. So the source of our unhappiness comes from our mind. It's not out there. It comes from my mind. So when we approach the hateful thought and take responsibility for it, well, that becomes the antithesis of blame. Yeah. And most importantly, we keep the initiative. So when we blame and put hatred out there, we lose our power in a way. We lose our initiative. Yeah. But when we own our mind, when we start to own the blame and the hatred that we feel, we cease the initiative. We cease becoming a victim to our own thoughts. So much like the story of Milarepa, where they make themselves the victims to their circumstances. They place themselves more and more, if you like, at the mercy of the aunt and uncle through their actions. They make themselves victims. They lose the initiative. So blame cannot be justified in the spiritual life. Hate cannot be justified if we want to evolve in the spiritual life. If we want to be happy, then these are the areas that we need to work with. And of course, it's our mind that also is causing our suffering. So I was just, Padmavajra talks about, if we want to give up blaming, we need to give up blaming if we want happiness. We need to love others regardless what others do to us. We need to remain open to others when we are hurting. And of course, our mind shapes the world that we live in. And when I was writing this the other day, I remember thinking, well, that's not right, is it? There was a real sort of reactive thought to that, that in a sense it hasn't quite, I haven't quite integrated that my mind is shaping the world. And of course, in a sense, that's a reflection. Intellectually, I understand that. But emotionally, my emotions are still lagging behind. So deep is my conditioning that the world is the problem. And this sense that others are responsible is still there. So the spiritual life is about taking responsibility, owning our mind, owning the hate that we cultivate. So we can be sure of one thing, that actions have consequences. And even the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas cannot take away the weight of our karma. So the story of Milarepa and Milarepa's sorcery is not specific or personal to him. We're all casting spells, or not all the time, but we have a tendency to do that. In some ways, we're playing with dark magic and wishing ill upon others. I am. So the nature of mind is universal. I feel this is really important for us to recognize this, actually. Not to justify our actions, but to help stop personalizing the nature of mind. Padmavajra talks about suffering isn't, dukkha's not personal. Of course, the problem often is that we take it personally. Milarepa's story isn't personal either. It's universal. So, yeah, I do think, reflect quite a lot about, you know, the potential that we all have, but particularly the potential I have for evil. And I often find myself can take quite a self-righteous view. And more recently, I've been reflecting on, to say I would never kill anyone is potentially a false view, because it's dependent on conditions. And, you know, it's quite hard to imagine what kind of conditions might arise where I would take that kind of action. But there's no, I just don't know, you know, what might be round the corner. There's an assumption, isn't there? If I say, oh, I could never kill anyone, there's an assumption that the conditions that I'm living in will never change. And we know that the conditions that we live in are actually only very temporary, very fragile, very provisional, and they could change so quickly. And of course, we've had a glimpse of that, haven't we, more recently, you know, with COVID. You know, I was thinking about Venezuela and, you know, and how quickly things changed in that country, you know. So I can't know what conditions I might end up in the future, where I might act like Milarepa did. So, yeah, so one of my practices that links with this is to be really careful and cautious about vilifying others, particularly in the media. You know, sometimes media creates quite a lot of story, doesn't it, about, you know, unpleasant characters, you know, but there's been a lot of hate. And I'm really very careful not to get sort of seduced into thinking that way, partly because I'm aware that I can't guarantee that couldn't be me on the front of the Times or the Sun or being on the news. So it's something I'm just very careful of, just because, and that's the self-righteousness, if that makes sense. Oh, you know, I'd never do that. Never do that, you know. And sometimes I've even caught myself, oh no, I wouldn't do that, I'm a Buddhist. You know, as if that gives me some kind of license not to kill. Oh, I'm a Buddhist. No, I don't indulge in that kind of thing. You know, so even being a Buddhist is provisional, you know, until we experience the enlightened mind. Yeah. So again, I'm sort of talking about these self-righteous views that can get embedded. I'm talking about my experience, and I'm hoping that you can connect with that, or this sort of piousness that sometimes, or or I even catch myself thinking, oh, I shouldn't be thinking like that. I'm a Buddhist, So again, I'm sort of pay a lot of attention to these kinds of operations of my mind. So as hard as it is to imagine being so violent and killing someone, it's also hard to imagine liberation, and experiencing full and complete enlightenment from conditioned things. And I think this is important that we have that balance in the story as well. It's very easy, isn't it, to separate ourselves out from Milarepa's story, which of course is dualistic. Yeah. The story isn't about Milarepa, it's about me. It's about you. It's about us. It's about mind. And it is painful to recognize our potential for evil. And we can only approach that with a lot of love and kindness to be aware of that possibility. We really are living, aren't we, on the edge of our conditions. And it's very easy just to over-attach myself to the current conditions that I live. So I remember not so long ago, well, December, that's not that long ago, is it? God, it felt like everything was breaking down at home. The boiler, the cooker, the bathroom light, the keys to my car, a hole in my sock. My favourite sock. I just put that in for laughs, by the way. I have to confess. I have to confess that one. And I remember thinking, why is this happening to me? Have I done something wrong? Was it my fault? Was it punishment? Was it that thought I had yesterday? And of course, the next step is I wanted to blame someone. Whose fault is it? Yeah. I wanted to make it personal. Yeah. Because I was taking it personally. And as I said earlier, dukkha isn't personal. The nature of mind isn't personal. Yeah. This is the nature of our minds and what we are working with. This is the nature of the conditioned world that I'm living in. So it's about becoming aware, isn't it, how fragile our current existence is. And I want to make it reliable. I want to make it robust so I can rely on it. I want to rely on my oven. When I pull the light in the bathroom, I want to know it's going to come on. So I was very struck how my happiness was so dependent on so many things outside of me. So we really are standing, aren't we, on the edge of conditioning, on the fragility of our conditioning. And what was so striking about the story of Milarepa was how fueling all that hate didn't bring any happiness or any change in their conditions, in his conditions. They were still without a large mansion and fields. So I've talked a little bit about the extremes of hate, if you like, and violence and killing, but I've also been reflecting a lot on the subtleties of it. So I've been reflecting a lot about work at the moment. It's very challenging at work. Lots of sickness and increased demands and pressure. Oh, and it's like, who can I blame? There's a real sense of wanting to pin it on someone or blame it on someone, and it can for me manifest in very, very subtle ways that might be dressed up in something else. So, Mara never comes as Mara. Yeah. So it can be really hard sometimes to see the subtleties of hate, and certainly for me. But actually, if I really think about it, well, what's going on there? Well, actually, it's the impermanence of things. That's what's upsetting me. It's the fact that the conditions at work are changing, that they're fragile, and I'm uncomfortable with that, and I want to blame someone for it. Yeah. I feel threatened. I want to blame someone and make it personal. So there's another subtlety of hate that I've been reflecting on is sometimes I quite like watching thrillers, these sorts of things, and and you can see these sort of stories unfolding, can't you? When someone's going to get shot and they deserve it. And it's just very subtle, isn't it? We can get enticed into this story of, the polarizing of good and bad, the goodie and the baddie, and the baddie deserved, they deserved to get what was coming for them. So again, there's something I sort of try and look out for in a story or a film, reveling in someone who deserves to die. And yes, it's a fictionalized story, but actually it's still fueling hate. So it's something I've just been questioning. In some ways it's an invitation for you to do the same. Just sort of notice the communities of hate you might be finding yourselves in. And they're quite subtle, aren't they? I do find for about 3-4 months now, I've just stopped watching the news. Well, actually, the last couple of weeks, I've probably been looking at headlines, but I had quite a significant period where I just didn't want anything to do with the news, because I felt like on a low, very low level, it was really just fueling hate and blame, and I just didn't want anything to do with it. Really, I think it had quite a big impact on my mind. And I definitely felt happier for it. So again, that's sort of one level that I've worked with, is sort of, because I think, it's interesting, the news, we can feel so justified, can't we, watching the news? Oh, I'm watching the news. Oh, all right, okay, I'll go and do the washing up then. So it's something I've been playing with. And the other thing I often think about is video games that foster killing as well. I know that might be challenging for some of you, but I feel like I want to challenge you in a way. And I do get quite disturbed that, that there are so many video games out there that sanction and justify killing. Oh, it's only a game. Well, I can't help think that it affects the mind. So it's very easy to get caught up, isn't it, in these sorts of things, because it's accepted by the world that we live in. And in some ways, like Milarepa, we need to sort of try and withdraw from these kind of influences. I'm not suggesting we all go and find a cave. I think that's a literal interpretation of the story. But it might be we can find caves where, symbolically, where we can live free from some of the influences that might have these very negative and quite subtle impacts on our mind. Detach ourselves from the tides of hate. that seem to sweep through media and social media. Yeah, I think these kind of places do fuel quite a lot of strong feelings, and I'm quite cautious of them. So much like hate fuels hate, kindness, compassion, love also helps us to feel more expansive. Hate narrows us, keeps us small, puts us in a more reactive place, whereas love expands us, it transforms our energies. And we might find it hard to imagine ourselves as an enlightened being. But actually, I feel like, certainly I do, I sort of put it out there, it's like over there, it's just too far away, I put it out of reach. And one thing I sort of play with is, well, what if I brought it closer to me? And more recently I was playing with this, I was thinking, what would liberation be for me? And I just had this sense, being free from anxiety. So I am quite an anxiety type of person. I just think, oh God, I had a real sense of what that might be like to be free of that kind of daily anxiety that seems to run through my life. And I think it's a really helpful practice to do is to sort of think, well, what moments might I have had where I touched that sense of liberation? And I think more recently what I've been doing, which I found really joyous, is just celebrating my victories. Just that moment when spontaneously some kindness happened. It's just, I don't mean this in an egotistical way, although there will be ego there, but there was just this real sense of, oh my God, where did that come from? There was a real sense of surprise, but also joy in just those small acts of kindness. And in a sense, they're all hinting at aspects of the enlightened mind, because it's not about me. This sort of focus is off me and on someone else. So sort of celebrating those little victories where you overcome hate and blame, and you move with expansion and kindness and compassion towards others. So as I've said, we're all capable of dark forces, but also capable of incredible acts of kindness. And I think it's really important that if we are to look at the darker nature of our mind and our potential, we also look at the potential for love and for kindness. So Milarepa was able to overcome all his karma, all his consequences of his actions, all that revenge and regret in one lifetime. Not many lifetimes, but one. And again, we are no different to Milarepa. We are all Milarepa. So, just drawing to a close, I thought I'd quite like to end with those verses that Vilifying read earlier. That's the wrong book, actually. That's the 10 Pillars of Buddhism. So rather interestingly, that these are the very first verses in the Dhammapada. And for some years, I learned the first 6 actually, and I tried to make a practice of repeating them every day. And it just, I haven't done that for some years now, but it just feels good to come back to them. That feels like they're friends actually. You know, I'd really encourage you to sort of make friends with little bits of Dharma that you can just pull down from at any moment, at any time. So it's really nice for me to reacquaint myself with these 8 verses, although I only learned the first 6. Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with an impure mind, suffering follows, even as the cartwheel follows the hoof of the ox, drawing the cart. Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows like a shadow that never departs. Those who entertain such thoughts as he abused me, he beat me, he conquered me, he robbed me, will not still their hatred. Those who do not entertain such thoughts as he abused me, he beat me, he conquered me, he robbed me, will still their hatred. Not by hatred are hatreds ever pacified here in the world. They are pacified by love. This is the eternal law. Others do not realize that we are all heading for death. Those who do realize it will compose their quarrels. As the wind blows down a weak tree, so Mara overthrows one who lives seeing the unlovely as lovely, whose senses are uncontrolled, who is immoderate in food, lazy, and of inferior vigor. As the wind does not blow down the rocky mountain peak, so Mara does not overthrow one who lives seeing the unlovely as unlovely, whose senses are controlled, who is moderate in food, and whose faith and rigour are aroused.